Welcome back to Poly 319, Peace and Conflict in the Middle East. It's good to be with you. Our topic, Section 2, Orientalism and Colonialism. Let's jump right in. One way to explore these ideas is to separate them out. So, even though the idea of Orientalism is inextricably linked to the realities of colonialism, we can treat them one at a time. We could start with either section. If we wanted, we could start with colonialism, we could jump right in. But I think I want to start with Orientalism. So let's back up and begin there. First, though, a quick word about the word itself. Of course, Orient refers to the East, just as Occident refers to the West. And when we talk about Orientalism, we're not just talking about the Far East or East Asia. The Orient in this context really means non-West, or everything east of the West. And a major focus of Orientalism is the Middle East. Okay, let's take a look. This panel is your main resource for learning about Orientalism in this class. We're going to explore all the sections and subsections here. And where does the idea of Orientalism come from? Mostly it comes from the work of Edward Said. Edward Said coined the term Orientalism. In the process, he advanced literary theory, post-colonial theory, and culture studies. Said applied Michel Foucault's idea of power knowledge to the social construction of culture and the Orient in Western literature and discourse. You don't have to really know what that means, it's a very technical statement, but if you're pursuing social sciences, you're going to need to be familiar with this. Most importantly for our purposes here, Edward Said argued that cultures, indeed civilizations, don't have essences. By essences, we mean unchanging, timeless truths. So cultures, he's arguing, are not simple, homogeneous, singular, enclosed, unchanging. Rather, they're complex, heterogeneous, plural, overlapping, dialogical, and adapting. In other words, cultures blend together. They influence each other. They change. They struggle internally with their own identity. It's not so simple as we are this way and they are that way. If you're interested in going a little bit deeper into Edward Said, take a look here. These are Edward Said's two most famous and influential books. You can click on them to bring up Google searches. If you don't want to go so far as to read his books, here's a couple of key YouTube lectures. First one is his classic talk, The Myth of the Clash of Civilizations, where he applies his ideas and offers a critique of Orientalist discourses.
There are no insulated cultures or civilizations. Any attempt made to separate them into the watertight compartments alleged by Huntington and his ilk does damage to their variety, their diversity, their sheer complexity of elements, their radical hybridity. The more insistent we are on the separation of cultures, the more inaccurate we are about ourselves and about others.
And the second video is more of a practical political lecture. He provides a scathing critique of Western foreign policy, particularly in the US war on terror, and particularly Israeli policy towards the Palestinians.
This has taken a horrific toll on the human condition of the Palestinians on every level. In fact, short of genocide itself, I cannot think of a single one of their human rights as a people that has not been violated with a kind of refined viciousness designed to dehumanize, break their spirit, and humiliate them to a degree that is simply stupefying.
Okay, so the idea of Orientalism refers critically to essentializing and othering of non-Western cultures through derogatory and patronizing lenses or filters. What do we mean by that? We can illustrate it by looking here. So here is the Western gaze, looking down upon the region. It's not a direct experience, but a filtered representation, filtered through media, discourse, economic and political interests, sets of institutions that just so happen to benefit from distorting the picture by dehumanizing, even blaming the people on the other end, conveniently absolving Western powers of the crimes of their own imperial and colonial conquests. So is it any surprise that the qualities that get ascribed to the region are mostly negative? The region is exotic, backwards, savage, tribal, superstitious, infantile, authoritarian, violent. We could add feminine to this list as well. The region is seen as, in some ways, feminine in the sense of something to be seized and possessed as a prize, feminine to be dominated and controlled. Adding a little bit to our understanding, the idea of Orientalism is a way of imagining, describing, diminishing non-Western cultures in ways that are conducive to domination. So it's not just mischaracterizing the region, but it's mischaracterizing with a purpose. We can see this visualized right here in culture. Have you seen Jeff Dunham's hilarious Ahmed the Dead Terrorist ventriloquist bit?
So, Ahmed? No, it's Ahmed. That's what I said. No, you said Ahmed. It's Ahmed.
Have you seen that movie Team America by the makers of South Park?
Durka, Muhammad Jihad.
Have you seen True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
This apparently is the same group which just detonated a nuclear bomb in the Florida Keys.
Crimson Jihad will rain fire on one major U.S. city each week.
I made that up.
Have you seen Back to the Future?
Who do you think? The Libyans! Holy sh!
So in media depictions, the Middle East and people from the Middle East are constantly depicted as backwards, barbarian, or violent, or exotic and mysterious. Now, have Muslim extremists blown themselves up for political causes? Are Arab dictators not sometimes outrageous? Have there not been terror groups and terror attacks? Of course. But this is about a selective filter. What gets through and what doesn't. And what doesn't is all the normalcy of Arab and Muslim life. What doesn't get through is the long-standing legacy of Western imperialism and colonialism in the region. What doesn't get through is the far greater violence inflicted by the West on the peoples of the Middle East. Also, show me a conflict in the world that hasn't produced violent attacks, extremist leaders, and even terrorism. Right? Think about the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, waged armed struggle against the British for colonizing Ireland for many, many years. In Colombia, the FARC. In Sri Lanka, in South Asia, the Tamil Tiger suicide bombers. Even Japan has seen extremist groups, for example, launching chemical weapon terror attacks on Tokyo's subway system. So the Muslim Middle East doesn't have a monopoly on terrible violence in politics. Though this region in particular has seen some more direct and brutal oppression than most parts of the world, by foreign powers and by local powers. So we might expect to see an all-around increase in violence. But on the subject of violence, if we really want to point fingers, Europeans themselves have carried out the worst political violence in human history. I don't just mean their empires and genocidal policies around the world, including quite close to home here, like I'm thinking about Turtle Island. The Europeans inflicted some of the most brutal military violence in history on themselves, and twice. It's called World War I and World War II. If some faraway alien race were to look down on Earth through a telescopic filter, if they wanted, they could depict Europe as nothing but a destructive cancer. Imagine the Dark Ages, the Spanish Inquisition, Industrial War, firebombing whole cities, killing hundreds of thousands in single attacks, gas chambers, wiping out millions of people. Yeah, we could make Westerners look pretty irredeemable. Of course, it's a bit more complex than that. And for all the terrible qualities, there's always victims, we need to remember. There's always opposition. There's always resistance. There's always principled leadership. There's always alternative models. So too, the people of the Middle East are more than the violence we are selectively fed. A violence which, by any reasonable comparison to the West, seems relatively minor. And it's not just culture per se. This is a political phenomenon. Let's take a look at a few quotes here. George Bush, at the beginning of the US War on Terror, famously said, "They hate us for our freedoms," completely erasing the history of military intervention, colonialism, occupation, exploitation, resource theft, but they hate us for our freedoms. In fact, in a rare moment of humor, Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden once mocked the idea that the Middle East hates the West for its freedoms. After 9/11, he said, "If we hate the West for its freedoms, why then didn't we attack Sweden?" Alluding to the fact that it's about policy. Here's a quote from a Princeton University scholar, Bernard Lewis, who was one of the leading experts on the Middle East for the second half of the 20th century, and he's been the subject of much critique, especially by Edward Said. But listen to what he says. "This hatred goes beyond hostility. It becomes a rejection of Western civilization as such. Not only what it does, but what it is, and the principles and values that it practices and professes. These are indeed seen as innately evil." He's saying they see us as evil. "And those who promote or accept them, us, are the enemies of God." Now, it's not to say that there are not radical extremists who indeed hold such views, but to paint with a broad brush, to categorize a whole region by these worst attributes of the few, is the problem with Orientalism. While Bernard Lewis doesn't have much of a platform anymore, we still see it, for example, with Bret Stephens, who has repeatedly used the phrase, "the disease of the Arab mind." Recently, in fact, Donald J. Trump called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. "I think Islam hates us," as if the whole region is one thing and one way. So we're getting a sense that Orientalism is a series of lenses and filters that really frame the region in ways that excuse and apologize for Western domination. Finally, another way to think about Orientalism is that it projects negative, inferior qualities onto distant others, while identifying the self-group as positive, superior. So they become our opposites. What do I mean here? Let's look at a few examples. West over East, us over them. These opposites are built into Western imaginaries of Eastern and Western identities. Remember, it's not just a social discursive construction of the other, it's also social discursive construction of us in quotes. And binary oppositions are the simple and dangerous mechanism for seeing the world this way. So notice all the quote positive unquote terms in these dichotomies are identified with the West, and all the negative or inferior terms are projected onto the East. And these binaries are not only sets of opposites, they're hierarchies, with the terms on the left of each pair superior or in control. We are civilized, they are savage. We are democratic, they are authoritarian. We peaceful, they violent. Rational over emotional. We are scientific, they are superstitious. We have discipline, they are lazy. We have the masculine qualities, they have the feminine. We are adults, they are children. In this paradigm, supporting dictators that we like, or invading countries of the region to control their resources, not only can we excuse it, but it becomes a noble enterprise, even like a stoic responsibility, a necessary lesser evil, the white man's burden. Well, we don't want to control them, but we must. It's for their sake. They need it. The alternative is far worse. They can't be left to themselves. Okay. So that's our overview of the idea of Orientalism.